Get started. Are there any questions on the homework assignment?
Nope. I'm locked in.
All right, everybody has a note sheet, yes?
Yep.
What we're looking at today is adding and subtracting polynomial functions and multiplying polynomial functions. Now the first thing we're going to do is add and subtract. So we're going to add these two polynomial functions here vertically, because we can add them vertically or horizontally. Now to add them vertically, we take our first expression, 3x cubed, plus 2x squared minus x minus 7. We write it out. And if there's any gaps, so any terms that are missing, either x, squared x, any terms that are missing from the biggest to the smallest, we can put them in as 0, or at most, or minimum, leave a space for that term. The second expression, we're going to write underneath it our x cubed, our negative 10x squared. Okay. Plus 8. And we're going to add these two together. Now, since there's not an x term, we don't put anything in the x's spot. And now we're going to add straight down. So we're going to add these two together. Now for this term here, we could add it as 0x. We can fill that spot in, or we can leave it blank. Either one works. First things we're going to be adding is 3x cubed plus x cubed would be 4x cubed. Then we'll have 2x squared plus negative 10x, or 2x squared minus 10x would be negative 8x squared. Then we'd have negative x plus 0x. Yes, sir. We can't type the whole thing in. We can type in the coefficients, the numbers, not the whole thing. Because the 3084 plus, the graphing calculators need a value for x, and so does the 30xs. So like the negative x plus 0x, we could plug it in as negative 1 plus 0, which will tell us that it's negative 1 or negative x. We can't type the whole thing in, unfortunately. And the last one, negative 7 plus 8, negative 7 plus 8 is plus 1. So we could go through and type the coefficients in, 3x squared plus x cubed, or 3x cubed plus x cubed, so 3 plus 1, 4. We can plug the numbers in, but we can't plug the variables in. We do have to do it one term at a time. So just combining like terms. Questions on this here? Questions on anything we've done so far? Well, let's look at one doing it horizontally. So if we do this horizontally, the first thing we need to do is write out our two expressions. So 9y cubed plus 3y squared minus 2y plus 1 plus negative 5y squared plus y minus 4. So we're writing it out horizontally. And we put parentheses around it just to start off with. Now with addition, we don't necessarily need the parentheses around both terms, so we can drop those parentheses. So we have 9y cubed plus 3y squared minus 2y plus 1. Now, since we're adding it, the signs with our second expression will stay the same. We're not going to have any sign changes. The main place where we would have sign changes is if we're subtracting, then there will be some changes in the signs of the second expression. And we'll see that more when we get to it. Now, at this point here, we're going to be starting combining like terms. 9y cubed. We always start with the term with the biggest variable, with the biggest exponent first. So 9y cubed. There's no other like terms with it. There's no other variable that is y cubed. So it stays the same, 9y cubed. Our 3y squared does have a like term with negative 5y squared, so we can combine those there. It's 3y squared minus 5y squared. 3 minus 5. That'd be negative 2y squared. Negative 2y plus y. Negative 2 plus 1 would be negative 1y. And then we have negative 1, or not negative 1, positive 1 minus 4 is negative 3. And that's it. So most of this here with addition is combining like terms, adding those like terms together. Questions on this here? Let's look at one more of each horizontally and vertically. So again, when we add vertically, we put them on top of each other and we put the like terms underneath each other. And again, just like the first one, they didn't put an x term, so we can just add it as 0x. Or we can just leave a space. Either one works because we need our like terms lined up. X cubes need to line up with each other. X squares, x's, constant terms. We need the like terms to line up. And then we're going to add. Since it told us to add these two together, we're going to add all the way through. And we can start with the biggest term first. 2x cubed plus x cubed is going to be 3x cubed. X squared plus 7x squared is going to be plus 8x squared. Negative 3x plus 0x, well, negative 3 plus 0 is negative 3. And we still have our x. And lastly, 4 plus negative 2, 4 minus 2 is positive 2. Yes. Questions on this one here? All right, guys. We feel good with this here. All right. Let's look at one more, adding horizontally. So negative 4y cubed plus 2y squared minus y plus 2 is first, and we're adding to it y squared minus 6y plus 9. Adding these two together. And again, since it's addition, we can go on and drop the parentheses, telling us we have 4y cubed plus 2y squared minus y plus 2. And our second one's going to be plus y squared minus 6y plus 9. Now we just need to combine like terms. So we'll start off with our y cubed because it's our variable with the biggest exponent. Since there is no other y cubed term, it stays negative 4y cubed. Our next one after y cubed is going to be y squared. So we have 2y squared plus y squared, or 2 plus 1.
Malachi, please come to the office. Malachi, please come to the office.
Which is going to be plus 3y squared. Then we'll have negative y minus 6y, since those are like terms. Negative 1 minus 6 would be negative 7y. And lastly, our constant terms, 2 and 9. And 2 plus 9 would give us 11. So telling us that our final answer is negative 4y cubed plus 3y squared minus 7y plus 11. And that's it. All right. I think we feel pretty comfortable with addition so far. Now we're going to look at subtraction, subtracting two polynomial functions. Now the first way we're going to see subtraction with these here is vertically, up and down. So we'll write the first expression first, which is our 2x cubed plus 6x squared minus x plus 1. And then we'll put the second one underneath, which will be our 8x cubed minus 3x squared minus 2x plus 9. Now at this point here, we're going to subtract. And I put the sign between each set of like terms to remind myself that I'm subtracting as we go through here. Now again, we can't actually plug in this whole thing into the calculator, but we could do the coefficients. So our first one, 2x cubed minus 8x cubed. Yes. So in the calculator, we can do 2 minus 8, which is negative 6. So we know that we'll have negative 6. And we still have our x cubed, because when we add or subtract like terms, the term itself stays the same. Our next one we have is 6x squared minus negative 3x squared. Well, here the negative and negative makes a plus. So 6x squared plus 3x squared is plus 9x squared. Or we could do 6 minus negative 3 in the calculator. 6 minus negative 3. It still tells us the coefficient. And we have negative x minus negative 2x. Well, here the negative and negative would make a plus. Negative x plus 2x is going to be plus x. And lastly, 1 minus 9 is going to be negative 8. And that's it. Questions on this here? Questions on any of this here so far? Yes, we're ready for the next one. Okay. The other way we can subtract is horizontally. 3z squared plus z minus 4 minus 2z squared plus 3z. We're subtracting horizontally. Now, just like with addition, the first set of parentheses will drop. It'll still be 3z squared plus z minus 4. In the second set of parentheses, we're going to distribute this negative through. So the 2z squared is going to become negative 2z squared. The positive 3z is going to become negative 3z. We have to distribute that negative through both terms. So, any questions on this so far? Now at this point here, we need to combine like terms. So our 3z squared and negative 2z squared, or 3z squared minus 2z squared is, well, just z squared. Our next set of like terms is z minus 3z. Well, z minus 3z, 1 minus 3 is going to be negative 2z. And the last term we have is negative 4. Since there are no other like terms with negative 4, it's just going to stay negative 4. Questions on this here? Questions on any of this so far, guys? All right. Let's look at one more subtraction. Do we want to look at it vertically or horizontally? We'll do one more. We'll do it horizontally. 3x cubed plus 5x squared minus x plus 8. And we're going to subtract from it 5x cubed minus 4x squared minus 3x plus 1. So even though it does say vertically, we're going to do this horizontally, so we've seen one more this way. Because the first thing we have to do is write it out. On the homework, most of these are already going to be written out. Now the first thing we're going to do is drop the first set of parentheses, which will give us 3x cubed plus 5x squared minus x plus 8. In the second set of parentheses, we're going to distribute this negative. Our 5x cubed is going to go from positive to negative. Our negative 4x squared is going to become positive 4x squared. Our negative 3x is going to become positive 3x. And our positive 1 is going to become negative 1. Questions on this so far? Now at this point here, we're going to go on and combine like terms. So our first set of like terms are 3x cubed and negative 5x cubed. Because we have 3 minus 5, 3x cubed minus 5x cubed is going to be negative 2x cubed. Next we have is 5x squared and 4x squared. 5x squared plus 4x squared. 5 plus 4 is going to give us plus 9x squared. Next, our negative x plus 3x. Negative 1 plus 3 is going to give us plus 2x. And lastly, 8 minus 1 is going to give us plus 7. Questions on any of this here? Questions on anything we've done so far? Do we feel pretty comfortable with addition, subtraction? Do we need to see another example of addition, subtraction? All right. In that case, we're going to move on to multiplication. When we multiply two polynomial expressions, if they are not already written in multiplication form, yes, sir. We need to first rewrite it out as two sets of parentheses being multiplied together. When we write them next to each other, it's understood that they are being multiplied. Now, just like with addition or subtraction, we can't just type this into the calculator because both calculators need a value for x. But the first thing we'll do is we're going to distribute, we're going to multiply through. Here, we're going to distribute that x squared to both terms. So our negative x squared times x. Well, negative x squared times x is going to be negative x cubed. Negative x squared times negative 3. The negative times a negative is going to give us a positive, and we'll have positive 3x squared. Next thing we're going to do is distribute the 2x. 2x times x is going to be plus 2x squared. 2x times negative 3, 2 times negative 3 would be negative 6x. And lastly, we're going to distribute the 4. Our positive 4 times positive x is going to be plus 4x. And our positive 4 times negative 3 is going to be negative 12. Thank you. You can just sit them over there. I'll take care of them in a minute. Yep. All right, guys, now we're going to combine like terms. Our x cubed does not have any like terms, so it's going to stay negative x cubed. We do have 2x squared terms. We have 3x squared and 2x squared. Well, 3x squared plus 2x squared is plus 5x squared. Next set of like terms are our x terms. Negative 6x plus 4x. Negative 6 plus 4 is going to be negative 2x. And our constant term, negative 12, does not have any like terms. So that is it there. Questions on any of this here? Let's look at the next one. We're doing y plus 5 times 3y squared minus 2y plus 2. This time the first thing we're going to distribute is the y because we normally multiply our left by the right. So we're going to do y times 3y squared. Well, y times 3y squared is 3y cubed. Then we'll do y times negative 2y, which is going to be negative 2y squared. And lastly, y times 2 is going to be plus 2y. Next thing we're going to do is multiply 3 by the 5. We're going to do 5 times 3y squared. Well, our 5 times 3 is going to be plus 15. And we still have our y squared. Then we'll do 5 times negative 2y, which will be negative 10y. And lastly, 5 times 2 is going to be plus 10. Questions on how we multiply this through? Now at this point here, we're going to combine like terms. Well, 3y cubed, there are no other like terms with it, so it's just going to be 3y cubed. Our 2y squared. Negative 2y squared and 15y squared are like terms, so we can combine those. Negative 2y squared plus 15y squared. Negative 2 plus 15 is going to be plus 13y squared. That brings us to our next set of like terms, our y term. We do have 2 of them. We have 2y and negative 10y. 2y minus 10y. 2 minus 10 is going to be negative 8y. And lastly, our constant term does not have any other like terms. So 3y cubed plus 13y squared minus 8y plus 10 is our final answer. Questions on how we did this here, how we multiplied these two together. Questions on anything we've done so far? Do we need to see another example of multiplying two polynomial expressions together? We feel good with this here. Okay. All right, now we're going to look at multiplying 3 polynomial expressions together. And multiplying 3 is not any different than multiplying 2. It's just we have to do it twice. So with 3 here, we're going to multiply 2 of these together first. We're either going to do x minus 1 and x plus 4, or x plus 4 and x plus 5. Or if you really want to, we could do x minus 1 and x plus 5. We just need to pick 2 of these to multiply together first, combine like terms, and then do it again. So what we can multiply first is the x minus 1 and x plus 4. Now, since we are going to have to multiply this again after we finish this, we still need the parentheses. So the first thing we can do, guys, I hope we're focusing, is the x minus 4 and x minus 1 and x plus 4. Well, our x times x is going to give us x squared. Our x times 4 is going to give us plus 4x. Our negative 1 times x is going to give us negative x. And lastly, negative 1 times 4 is going to give us negative 4. Now we still have the x plus 5 because we haven't done anything with it yet. Now at this point here, we could go on and multiply the next two together. But I would highly advise to combine like terms if we have them before moving on. Because our 4x minus x is going to give us plus 3x. Now for this here, it isn't going to give us a whole lot of extra terms if we left it as 4x and negative x. It would just give us exactly 2 more. But it's going to be nicer if we combine like terms before we start our next multiplication. Questions on this here before we multiply again? So the next thing we're going to do is distribute our x squared. So our x squared times x is going to be x cubed. Now at this point here, we don't need the parentheses anymore. And x squared times 5 is going to be plus 5x squared. Then we'll move on to 3x. 3x times x is going to be plus 3x squared. And 3x times 5 is going to be plus 15x. And lastly, we're going to move on to negative 4. Negative 4 times x is negative 4x. And lastly, negative 4 times 5, positive 5, is going to be negative 20. Now at this point here, we do need to combine like terms. Now x cubed doesn't have any like terms. But our 5x squared and 3x squared are like terms. So we're going to do 5x squared plus 3x squared. 5 plus 3 gives us 8x squared. Our other set of like terms are 15x and negative 4x. 15x minus 4x is going to be plus 11x. And our constant term of negative 20 does not have any like terms, so it stays the same, telling us that this is x cubed plus 8x squared plus 11x minus 20, and that there is our final answer. Questions on any of this here? We'll look at one more, multiplying three things together. We have x plus 2 times x minus 1 times x minus 3. And again, we're going to multiply these first two together first before we move on to multiplying the third with it. Because we need to multiply two of them together first. And once we find their product, we'll multiply it with the other one. So the first thing we'll do is distribute the x through these first two terms here. X times x would give us x squared. X times negative 1 would be negative x. And then we'll distribute the 2. Questions? 2 times x is going to be positive 2x. And 2 times negative 1 is going to be negative 2. And we're still multiplying that with the x minus 3. Now at this point here, we do need to combine like terms. Our negative x plus 2x is going to give us plus x minus 2. So we have x squared plus x minus 2 is being multiplied by x minus 3. And just like we did before, we're going to do our multiplication again. We're going to do x squared times x, which can give us x cubed. We'll do x squared times negative 3, giving us negative 3x squared. Then we'll distribute the x next. X times x is going to be plus x squared. X times negative 3 is negative 3x. And lastly, we're going to distribute the negative 2. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative 2 times negative 3 is going to be plus 6. Negative 3x squared plus x squared. Negative 3 plus 1 is going to be negative 2x squared. Negative 3x minus 2x, negative 3 minus 2 is negative 5x, and 6 doesn't have any like terms, so it's just going to be plus 6. Telling us that our expression is x cubed minus 2x squared minus 5x plus 6. Any questions on any of this here? Do we need to see another example of how to multiply two or more expressions together? We feel pretty good with addition, subtraction, and multiplication. Now, there are some shortcuts, some special product patterns, because we have sum or difference, our sum or difference product. We know that a squared minus b squared will factor to a plus b times a minus b. But that also means that we can go the other way around. That if we have a plus b times a minus b, it's going to be our a term squared minus our b term squared. And same thing with square binomials or cube of a binomial. And all that's telling us as well, if we looked at this here, 4n plus 5 times 4n minus 5 is our difference of perfect squares. So we'd square the first term and subtract it from the square of the second. Well, our first term is 4n. Well, if we square it, multiply it by itself, 4n times 4n would give us 16n squared. Our 5 times 5 would give us 25, and they would be subtracted. Now, if we actually work this out, multiply this out, we will get to the same spot. 4n times 4n would indeed be 16n squared. 4 times 4 is 16, n times n is n squared. 4n times negative 5 is going to be negative 20n. Now we distribute the 5. 5 times 4n is going to be plus 20n. 5 times negative 5 is negative 25. Negative 20n plus 20n is 0, leaving us with 16n squared minus 25. So if we see the shortcut, we can use it, but also if we multiply it out, we will get to the same spot. Same thing is true with our 9y minus 2 squared. Because really all this is saying is that we have 9y minus 2 times 9y minus 2. And according to our special product property, this here is going to multiply out to give us this here. We can use the pattern, or we can actually just multiply it out. 9y times 9y is 81y squared. 9y times negative 2 is negative 18. And that should be 32, not 36. Y. No, it is 36. I was right the first time. And then we'll do the other direction. Negative 2 times 9y is going to be negative 18y. And negative 2 times negative 2 is plus 4. Combine our like terms, and we do get to 81y squared minus 36y plus 4. So knowing the special pattern does get to these faster, but we can actually still multiply them together and get to the same spot. Questions on this here? And that's it. This is your homework.